My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Tuesday, July 22nd, 2008, and I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma interviewing Dr. Jeanine Rhea. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Dr. Rhea was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 2005. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, let's begin by learning a little bit more about you, where you grew up, and if you could give us a little background on your early life.
I grew up 13 miles south of Omaha, Nebraska, in a small town, 6,000 people, called Plattsmouth, and it was where the Platte River meets the Missouri River. And it was a life of everyone in town had the right to correct, advise, discipline, come to your wedding from the time I was born until I left. Well, even now, occasionally, they don't mind giving their opinion as to what and where you should be doing. The high school, the whole grade school, I went through school with many of my classmates from the time we were in kindergarten through high school graduation. And we graduated with 84 in our class. And we had a movie theater, we called it a picture show, but it burned. So, we were pretty much left up to our own designs as to how to create fun. But we had lots of slumber parties, and of course the farm area was a big part of our lives, and we were city kids, known as. Probably the thing that took up a lot of my time growing up, there were probably three things. I was an avid reader. I loved to read, and I could walk from my house to the library, and it was probably 1.5 miles or 2 miles to do that. But it was a very pleasant, sociable meander through the town, and so I spent a lot of time with my books and reading. I loved to read. And the other things that I did, I took piano lessons from Miss Kitty Roberts, who was a very strict disciplinarian, and I never learned to play the piano, but I learned a lot from Miss Roberts. And I took dancing from Jeanine. When I was 9, I'd heard that there were children who were taking dancing lessons. So one day when it was my mother's time to clean the church, volunteer to clean the church, I went with her, and the church was about 3 blocks from the library up on a hill. This is a very hilly area. And I walked. I'd heard this lady was down there teaching. So I walked down there and went in, and when she had time, I told her that I was there to start dancing lessons. So then I went home and told my mother when my next dancing lesson was. I went back to the church, told her when my next dancing lesson was, and that I needed tap shoes and $5 because it was going to be $5 a month to take lessons. So she decided that since I wanted to do that so badly, and dancing was a huge part of my life for a long, long time. I was probably 28 before I quit teaching or, dance and ballet. It just became more and more a bigger part of my life, as music was. Had many, many friends, still do, from my hometown. And we still get together, we still get on the phone, we still email. They're still with me.
What were some of your favorite subjects when you were in school, when you were younger?
Well, English, I loved literature. And so my major at the university actually was in English when I went to university, because I was a student of English and the literature. I don't think I student taught for one semester English and decided those students didn't like English nearly as much as I did, and I didn't think I'd be a very good English teacher. So I actually had taken enough business courses that I was certified to teach. But English was my favorite, and language always fascinated me. So,
When you were a youth, did you aspire to become a teacher or a professional dancer? Or?
Actually, this is true, and I've told it many times, that when I was 5 and went to my kindergarten class and I met Miss Poppy for the first time, who I thought when I was 5 was old, but she was probably, I don't know, 19 or 20. She probably only had 2 years of university, because at that time you could do that. But I walked into that classroom and saw the most powerful woman in the world. She held the chalk. And I knew I always wanted to be the person with the chalk. And I never, ever deviated. I was going to be a classroom teacher. And I loved it. I just never could believe that people would actually pay me to go in there and spout off to a captive audience. But they did.
Now, where did you go on to receive your undergraduate education?
I went the first 2 years to a Methodist private liberal arts, Nebraska Wesleyan. That's where I met my husband, and we were married at the end of our sophomore years, and we transferred to the University of Nebraska. We were so involved at Wesleyan that we knew that they would never let us out of all of the activities that we were in at Wesleyan. And so we transferred to Nebraska, and he had a dance band and was on the air on the radio as a disc jockey, and I had the dance studio. And we made a lot of money during that time, going to school and being married. And you know, there was no married student housing then. In fact, they weren't looking very kindly in 1958 upon students being married and at the university. That was a challenge. But we graduated from the University of Nebraska, and when we finished, we both said, we will never darken the door of an institution of higher education again in our lives. We just worked too hard, and life had been happening, and it really took us 3 years to finish those last 2 years. So I had gotten quite ill, and we had to put off and take eyes. So we were done, and we moved to Nebraska City, and I opened a dance studio there, and people in Nebraska City didn't even know I had a degree. The only one that knew was the principal of the high school, because he'd been my band teacher when I was in high school. Now he was the principal of Nebraska City High School. So one day I got the call, Jeanine, we have to have you come and substitute. So I went in to be a substitute teacher, and that was a big aha for most of my friends in this new community we were in. But, you know, as it happens, we loved our time there. 2 of our daughters were born there. We built a brand new house there. I thought we were set for life. I thought Jim was the sales manager and then assistant manager at the radio station, and I had the dance studio, so we were happy. But he decided he wanted to go on and get a master's degree, so we moved to Lawrence, Kansas. And that's when I started teaching in Kansas City in a high school, and it was business that they wanted to have me teach. and I was a certified business teacher. So I'd taken enough hours to get that accomplished.
Now, was it more shorthand and typing, or was it different?
I actually got hired to teach shorthand, which I was terrible at. And I taught, that's the reason I got hired at this high school. And I taught it one semester. And I taught office management and then consumer economics. And I really moved then out. I never ever taught shorthand again. And because I was teaching consumer economics, the Kansas Savings and Loan offered me the opportunity to take a graduate course in money and banking at the University of Kansas. So I did that. Everybody else in the class already had their master's and they were working on PhDs. So I didn't know anything. And everything that Dr. Leland Pritchard said to me was gospel. So I finished that class, the top of the class, because I didn't have any other stuff in my head except what he said and his book. But of course, he was quoted 2 times on the front page of the Wall Street Journal while I was in that class. So he had high credibility. And that was really a turning point for me, because that's when I decided maybe I could possibly go back and do a master's. And when we moved to Memphis, Jim took a teaching position when he finished his master's. We moved to Memphis, and I had a graduate assistantship in the College of Business and Computer Science.
And what was the coursework like back then when you were working on your master's?
Unique. I know what a dinosaur feels like because I finished that degree in 1969. And of course, computers changed significantly. Everything I did was on big charts of paper. We did mapping and all kinds of wiring panels and star wheels and punch cards and anything you read about the history of computers. Fortran was our basic language, and that's what the courses were. And the Memphis time, the other part about all of this is we probably have to recognize that as we were going through each of these stages, there was a lot of change going on all around us in the United States. And because the girls were born in 62 and 64, and I started teaching in 65, in the spring, in January of 65. And from then on, through those, and my students were going off to fight in the Vietnam War. It was not a fun time. And while I was working on my master's degree in Memphis, was when the sanitation strike happened, and we were all put on curfew. You couldn't be out past a certain time. You couldn't buy more than a gallon or 2 of gasoline at the time. And some of my graduate classes were at night. Well, during that spring term, the first few weeks, we couldn't meet at night because we were on curfew. So we sort of did everything during the daytime. We'd check with our professors and see what we had to do and turn in assignments. So the first time our night class met was the night Dr. King was assassinated. And we were in class, and Dr. Peoples was our professor, and the highway patrol came to our door. and opened the door and said, "You all are dismissed. You will go immediately to your homes." And Dr. Peoples was very offended. He said, "They're taking a midterm examination." He said, "Not anymore." So everything changed overnight. And then, of course, we left Memphis. We have loved Memphis. The people, everything we learned there, my professors, it was only a positive experience for us. And we left there for Jim to finish his PhD. And he'd been working on it at Kansas, University of Kansas. His major professor had moved to Ohio, and Ohio University in Athens. So we decided we would take a year's leave of absence from Memphis and for him to begin that degree and see what could happen. But not begin it, he'd already had quite a bit out of the way. And as it ended up, we rented our house to some people that were coming in, a young couple, and our neighbors took care of it for us while we were gone. And we just didn't even worry about it. Jim worked very, very hard on his PhD, and he did it actually, was able to, they're on the quarter system, so they were actually able to finish it in 15 months. But while we were there, Kent State happened. And Jim was out interviewing for other jobs, and Ohio University closed down. Well, I mean, we were having, it was a tear gas and everything happened during that time. So they closed the university. And then the only way he could do his research was to have a special little paper card or tag to get into the computer center, the library, or wherever he needed to go. Well, this time he'd been gone, we had a riot. So he's trying to get back into Athens, and the National Guard won't let him in. So now by this time we have a new baby who's been born in Athens, a boy. And I had to load up all three of those children way early in the morning, and of course no cell phones, head out to where the National Guard was and say, the Checkpoint Charlie, and say, "Yes, that's Jim Ray, let him in." So he was able to come back in, and the closest we ever came to getting a divorce, though, you know that little white card I was telling you about? I washed it. And he was not a happy camper over that. But, you know, the good news was he'd been in and out of the library and the computer center often enough that the security guards never asked him for it. Because we knew we would have a terrible time getting that back. So when we moved to Stillwater, we didn't go back to Memphis, and there were some real reasons. The university had helped us as far as financially, but then they weren't willing to increase his pay like other universities were willing to do. So we just paid Memphis State back. At the time it was called Memphis State, now it's University of Memphis. But OSU called, and he looked in Alabama, Indiana, and he had offers from those three schools, and he chose Stillwater. My parents were exceptionally happy because when we got to Stillwater in 1970, August 23rd, it was like the 60s had not happened. And the most traumatic, dangerous thing that happened in Stillwater, Oklahoma was streaker night. So and then when we got there, I started on my degree.
Whew. From Dr. King to streaker night to...
Right. But all of that has made a difference in my perceptions, the dancing, when I was really involved in growing up as a dancer, I would go to Omaha to take lessons most of the time. And many of the children there were not of the same race that I was. And we got very close and comfortable and friends. And that was very early on. And I think all of that made a difference in the way that I ended up teaching a class on diversity, with never having had any coursework in the area. Of course, there wasn't any. You had to make it up as you went.
When you were working on your master's degree and your PhD, were there many women or minorities in your classes?
Masters, it wasn't too bad. At the doctorate level, it would be me and the boys. You know, it could be me and 40 males. And the worst problem I think I ever felt was when I went into a class and there were 11 males in there, and they had already taken a class together. And now here I was, and they were not happy. And of course, all kinds of comments. Dr. Ralph Catalanello was the professor of that class. I can't believe I remembered that. But he was a wonderful professor, very open. And I learned so much from him, not just in the class, but outside of class, because he would allow you to come and have discussions and interaction, and great mind. But the very first night of class, the men in the class were saying things like, oh, now we're going to have to clean up our language. And, oh, I guess we can't go to the Gray Fox anymore. They called it the Fox. It was a tavern just off campus where there's a bookstore there now. But evidently that was one of the things that they enjoyed doing together. And we never actually ever did go to the Gray Fox again. But by the end of the term, I learned a big lesson there, because the next semester, instead of just the 11 being together in a class for a second time, the 12 of us were going into another class together, a graduate class with a different professor. And a new person was coming into the class. The new person was male. And they began to treat him very much like they had treated me. It was just different kind of slams. Mm-hmm. So that I was very aware that it had a lot more to do with building that team and that commonality than just probably the fact that I was a female. At least that's the way I chose to see it.
Did you plan on becoming a professor, or?
You know, that's interesting, because I had loved teaching in high school so very much. And I knew it was important to get a master's degree, but I hadn't really ever planned at all on going past that. And it was at the urging of at that point when we were in Stillwater, Jim was a department head and in the radio, TV, film. And so I was a faculty wife with 3 small children, and I was volunteering, but I wasn't working. Well, when the faculty in the College of Business knew that I'd gotten my master's degree and knew where it came from, because that was a respected program, at the dances and things that we had together, social events, they would be saying, like Dr. John Bale, herb jelly, Dr. Garrison, they would be saying to me, you need to get into our doctoral program. You have to get into it. And I was going, I don't even think I could pass a test to get into it. But finally, I just said, what the heck, I'm here. Might as well try. And I got an assistantship right away, so that was it.
Was your area of focus research always minority women, or was it something totally different?
Well, it was really because I'd come out of the computer keyboarding background. My doctoral dissertation, what I did was I'd heard that there were some new programs out where they were teaching children to keyboard without a teacher in there, without a classroom teacher. So I really wanted to test that and see if it made a huge difference to have a teacher or have the technology. So my dissertation was an experimental design, and the Stillwater Public Schools actually let me use the 7th grade students, and I had 60 students. 30 were in traditional taught classroom and 30 were in the experimental class. And it was a wonderful, wonderful research project. And it got nominated actually for a research award. It was one of the top 3. One of the conferences. It's been so long I can't even remember now. But I transported by bus, school bus, every day, 5 days a week. 60 children came at 2 different times. I managed both classrooms, but one classroom, I couldn't do any teaching. All I could do was answer a question. And I had, as we did a random sample, I had the same amount of males and females. And the bizarre thing was, one young man broke his arm, and by golly, the other class, a young woman broke her arm within 7 days.
Very strange.
And I promise, people accused me of going out and breaking her arm, but I did not do that. But we tested them on a whole battery of tests. I don't even remember all now, but it had to do with their agility, it had to do with their IQ, and we looked at many, many variables in that.
Was the one group using computer-based training? And I guess computers are a little smaller from the larger models, just a little bit, possibly.
Well, actually, what it was not computer. It was programmed learning. The books had come out for the students to do it on their own.
Oh.
Just read and do it was a program.
Okay.
It didn't have the technology, no.
Okay. And after you finished your PhD, was there a plan for OSU to hire you, or were you looking at other schools?
Oh yes. I thought for sure, because actually the whole family was getting ready to leave. I mean, even our daughters, one of them called a family meeting and said, we've been here 3 years. How long are we planning on being here? It's time to move on. And she was 7 at the time. So, no, I did not plan to stay in Stillwater, but the department head called me in, and they had, I don't remember for sure, either 2 or 3 positions that were going to be open. I think maybe 2. And they were bringing in different candidates. And he said, I think you should put your name in. And I said, I will not do that if you're just trying to be nice, because I'm not interested. And I don't want to play any games here. And he said, you've had teaching experience, you've owned your own business, you've done all of these things, and you're going to have to go through the whole process, but we want to interview you. So I did and they did. There we stayed.
What did you start out teaching now that you were hired on?
Business communication. It was let me think. And methods. At one time, we had a business education program. And I had been a certified teacher and had taken methodology classes. So when I got hired, I became one of the supervisors for business teacher education. And we would have students in methods classes and in student teaching and first year teaching, and that really was my area for many years. I'm trying to think of when I think it was probably 1980 something before 1975, I started teaching a class called Women in Business. And then it became Administrative Strategies for Women in Business. And then it became the diversity class. So that was early on that took hold. So I guess only the first couple years did I teach business communication. And then I taught organizational communication, which was the first class was really a letter writing class. Gosh, it's making me think of things from a long time ago.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's your job.
Going back to what would become the diversity class, when you started teaching it, what was the class population?
All female. Because it was what had happened, we were growing in the College of Business, but the reason we were growing was because of the women students coming into the college, majoring in marketing, management, finance, accounting, economics, and not just in the office management or business education area. And I just became very aware, and it was like overnight, that I just said, we have got to do something. This is not okay. These young women are coming in here, and if they see any films, they weren't videotapes, and there were cases, but I'd been through the program, so I knew what those were like. And women were always the problem. They were never the solution to the problem. They were never the director, the project person, the chair. They were always cleaning up behind somebody and taking care of the messes, or they created the messes. And I just felt very strongly that these new young women needed to understand that, number one, the rules were not the same for them as they were for the young men. They just were not. And they needed to know that. It was not fair for them. I knew we would lose many of them if they weren't aware that it was not their fault. That people would say things to them, hurtful, awful things. Set low expectations. So I went to my department head, Dr. Lloyd Garrison has to be a prince among men, because he had the patience of Job with me. Here he had this female in there turning over tables all of the time, causing a ruckus. And he supported me. And I said, I need to go talk to somebody. And I know there's a woman at Southern Methodist University, and she's been doing some investigation into women's issues, and I've got to go talk to her. Well, I went to talk to her. I can't think of her name right now. But we spent 2 days together, and the last piece of advice she gave me was, don't go there. Don't get involved. It will break your heart and you will have a nervous breakdown. And I told my husband about that, and he said, well, I think you have your challenge now. Sounds like it's a plan. And I went back and started working on an outline, and somebody in sociology helped me get a copy of research that had been done at Harvard University. And it was the research that the book, The Managerial Woman, was based on by Hennig and Jardim. And I got a copy of that dissertation. So out of that, before the book was published, and out of that book, I was able to create my own questions, besides the questions I had. I looked at the questions they had. And I applied for an OSU Presidential Challenge grant to do work in the area of women in business. And at that very time, the university was interested, and Jay Boggs was the academic vice president. And he'd sent a message to the dean saying, we want a course from the College of Business, Spotlight on Women, they were called. And here I was digging around. So I walked out into the hall, and all my male colleagues were around, and I said, okay, guys, we're going to have a class, and it's dealing with women. What are we going to call it? I just call it Women in Business. So we did. And the first class that was offered with 12 women in the summer. And they really helped create the outline for what would happen. So all that fall term, I worked on that research and did. I went to Wichita and interviewed people at Lear, Cessna, Boeing, Coleman, and Fourth National Bank. And they were all male-oriented work environments. And I gathered some amazing information, and out of that created the basis for this class. There weren't any books published. Honestly, at that time, if there were any magazines out there that had it, it was McCall's, and women's magazines would have occasionally. You'd find something in there, but none of the professional magazines had anything, or our academic magazines had anything that we could use. We operated out of the newspaper, events, things that had happened. It was amazing. So that fall, the class was created called Administrative Strategies for Women in Business, and it was a junior-senior class. And those first 12 women helped with that outline and what the discussion points would be, and that was the beginning. And I didn't think we'd have any people in that first class because there wasn't in the class schedule. I went to a couple of local meetings in town and said, here's what we're going to be doing. And it was always held in the evening, so women who worked, or if they had children, they could have someone taking care of the children. And it was always held on Tuesday night, 6:30, 40 people the first semester.
Very groundbreaking for that time.
Oh, yes. Well, and I was invited to speak and go all over the country and did a lot of places. And I was asked to publish a book. But the truth was I felt like I couldn't because it was moving so fast and changing so fast. By the time that anything got printed, it was too late. We needed to move on. And it just started growing from there. And the primary people in that class were females until I had the athletic director who was working with Jimmy Johnson at the time came in, and he wanted to take the class. And I said, it's all females. He said, that's why I want to take it. He said, I intend to be in this business for a long time, and I'm going to have females that I'm working with. And I don't want to do something stupid, and I know I will. And I said, okay, on that basis, I will let you come into the class. And then probably 2 or 3 semesters after that, the whole golf team was there. Well, after that, at least a third of the class, even when it was called Administrative Strategies for Women in Business. And they were walking around carrying the managerial woman as one of their readings. The young men would always tell me funny stories about how they hide their books and don't want other people to see what they're reading. But it was a great, wonderful experience. Oh my gosh. And it was 3 hours, so we had time to do something in that time period.
Would you have just class discussion, or what types of items would you cover? In a nutshell.
There isn't any way to cover that in a nutshell. No way. Well, I normally would start out with some kind of me presenting something. It might be the issue we might be talking about, risk, and how males and females look at risk differently. And I always tried to help them understand that different just meant different. It didn't mean good or bad, better, best, worst, nothing. It's just different. So what do we need to know about those differences that will help us in working with each other? And I would present information and maybe graph some things, and then, but during the 3-hour period, we normally, well, for many years, I was the only person teaching at night in the college business. So we had the whole building, and I could break them out into groups and put a team leader in each one and give them a discussion question, and then so much time. And then they would come back together, and the groups would report what they had talked about and finalized. Sometimes they'd have different questions, sometimes they'd have the same. And then we, as a group, share. But I had as many as 75 people in that class sometimes. And it was designed for 24. So I had to teach it like it was 24. But they had to have team leaders so they could do their own discussions and then come back together to interact. People had to talk in that class. And then we had, I had what I called optional tasks. If you came to class all the time and you got A's on 100% on all your tests, you could get a C. Because I told you what the questions are going to be, and you should prepare for those. And they were all essay questions. And you should be able to come one night a week. Now, if you want a better grade than that, these are the optional things you can do. You can read a magazine article and present it and allow the class to ask you questions. Or you can go to a special workshop or seminar and write a critique on that and turn it into me, and sometimes I'd have you talk about that. There were a whole list of optional tasks. The students regularly, every semester, would point out to me, Dr. Rhea, those are not optional if you want an A. I said, well, your choice.
At what point did you have the foresight to expand it just from a woman's focus to minority inclusion?
Your students lead you the way. They are the ones, because they saw some of the connections in race or disabilities, I hate to call it challenges, age and gender. Each one of those was sort of added as it grew into a more of an issue for us. And the gender and the race came very closely after, but we were still calling it administrative strategies. But I went back to Memphis and took, I don't know, about a 3 or 4 day workshop from Roosevelt Thomas. And he had written the book Race and Gender that I had been using for the class. And it was an amazing time to spend with him. But I knew that I knew a lot more about race than I had thought I did. It confirmed that there were many, many connections there. And then ageism, the different generations hadn't become, when it did, it just integrated itself in. And that's how those things just happened. They just integrated themselves in. You know, we started out, sexual harassment wasn't, or harassment, however you want to pronounce it, was not an issue to begin with. It had always been an issue, but we hadn't talked about it. And then, probably after the first session or two, we got into sexual harassment. Before it was out there in the mainstream.
Were many colleges and universities integrating these types of courses?
No. That's why I was asked to come and help put them together. And I spoke at a lot of conferences and gave out all the information I had, sent them to places. Yeah, no.
Tell me.
I just had different support. I was so fortunate that I had somebody like Jay Boggs, and I had our dean, Sandmeyer, and I had my department head early on, and my colleagues. I could not have done this without my colleagues. Of course, some of them didn't know they were helping me at the time. They put little funny cartoons on my door, to kind of give me a raise or, get a reaction. And I just took those off and had them made into transparencies. You used it for class, for discussion points. Well, when they found out I was doing that, they'd leave them on my door, but sign who'd sent them. So that was pretty funny.
Well, it's a great preparation tool for women back then, because you're right, they didn't really know what was ahead of them and what could be.
That's right.
So that was great, groundbreaking curriculum. And OSU is very fortunate that you were able to not only teach it, but also spread the good word to other universities.
It was a trip and a half. And can you believe it? They paid me.
Well, tell me a little bit about the Women's Business Leadership Program and how that came about.
Well, that is a brainchild of Lou Kerr. And I don't know if you ever had the opportunity to meet Lou Kerr, but she would be a wonderful person for you to interview because she has the greatest imagination and she's so creative. And she has the ability to do something about it. She has a network of people that she can just call on, and because of her enthusiasm and her motivation and her support, you can get things done. You don't just talk about them, they happen. And she surrounds herself with the best people. Her staff, I mean, they are top drawer. And she went to Dean Poole. Well, he wasn't the dean then, he was Vice President Poole. And she had an idea. I believe that she went to the University of Oklahoma first with this idea, and they weren't ecstatic about it. But Vice President Poole was. So they got together and decided the College of Business was having a lecture series at that time that was primarily, almost always we had somebody who was male there doing this. And they were wonderful, wonderful speakers. And primarily the audience was male because they were powerful people in powerful positions in either Oklahoma City or Oklahoma City. Now, through the years, that's changed. The demographics has changed. But early on, that was primarily, you know, a female in that mix was rare. But she said, well, we need to have something for women. So originally they did like a half a day that followed up the men's program, or was at the same time. And then she got connected. I don't know if it was Julie or if it was Jim Romas, the very first. You're asking me to remember a lot. And came through the business extension. That's what it was called then. It has a new name now. But she got together with them, and with her Oklahoma International Women's Forum, that's its own unique group of women who just do amazing things in this state that just couldn't be done any other way. In Oklahoma City or, I'm thinking of the academic science and math, high school academic. They've been very involved in that, just so many different kinds of things. And Martha Griffin is their president, and Lou Kerr is really more the one that really got it started. And she with Vice President Poole and Business Extension, and then they came to me and asked me would I help moderate it. And so the second year I began to be moderator. And so Lou gets the speakers, and it was up to me to create a program that was a good mix and get each one of them comfortable with speaking, because many times they had a great story, but they weren't particularly comfortable with getting up in front of a group like that and speaking. And that was my job, to pull it all together, talk to the speakers, make them feel comfortable, and have it happen, have a theme. So that's what I did.
You retired in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
If you could touch upon a few career highlights.
every single day walking into that classroom. Highlight of my career, honestly and truly, I just cannot tell you what a blessing it was. Because I learned so much from those young people, whether it was teaching business organization or, I loved those Tuesday, Thursday classes in the morning because there were 30 in each class, and oh my gosh, we did so much in the area of communication there, and it was so different than the diversity class, really. And I just, that, you can look at, of course, in 1980, when I was in California to training, and I did teach a lot of training and development graduate classes too along the way. I was at a training and development ASTD meeting in California, and I got a call from the vice president's office telling me that I had been nominated for an AMICO Outstanding Teaching Award. And hearing that, and that I was going to have to fly home early because I had to be interviewed, and hearing that I was nominated, I just was amazed, because at that time, we didn't fill out anything. We didn't have to create a portfolio. If we had, I probably never would have received it, because I tend not to put that all together. But I did. Oh, it was fun. And I guess the other part was the opportunities that I've had serving on university committees, working with people across campus, and getting outside of your own area. I like serving on the library board, because you're seeing things from somebody else's perspective or hearing about it. So those were good things. Just the conversations I've had with my colleagues, the traveling we've done. I don't think I could say any one huge thing. I have been so grateful that they have established the professorship in my name, and the being inducted in the Oklahoma Higher Education Hall of Fame. I mean, that to me, when you're doing something you truly, truly love and somebody notices it, that's really nice. That's probably it. It's been a good life, good career.
Going back to 2005, when you were being inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame, do you remember what you were feeling when you caught word of it?
It was at Christmas time, and it was right after Christmas that I got the phone call, and it was Patricia that called, and I was very ill. I mean, I was in bed, fever, the whole thing. And I truly thought I was hallucinating when this voice said that I had been selected to be inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame. I think I said, "What? You've got to be kidding me." I could not imagine how that had happened. And our daughter was there. Our second daughter lives in Iowa, and she was there. She's a professor up there. And she stood in the doorway and she said, "Mom, are you okay? What's going on?" And so while Patricia's still on the phone, I'm saying, "You're not going to believe what she just told me." So yes, I can remember, and I felt terrible about that afterwards. I thought I should have been so, "Oh, thank you so much. That's a wonderful thing." But I was just astounded.
Did you attend the ceremony?
Oh, yes. Oh, I wouldn't have missed it.
Do you remember who presented you?
Luker.
And did you have a lot of family and friends in attendance?
Yes. Yes. People from our church in Stillwater, people from Tulsa, new friends that we just really met, and my neighbors from, where we've been living in Stillwater came, and two of the children came. The one from Iowa, that was not going to be, she has two little ones, and that would have been a real, but everybody else was there. And she was there in spirit. People from Kansas City even came.
And what does this honor mean to you?
Maybe that I was doing something of value and something right. And I will tell you that during those early times when I was teaching the diversity class, there were definitely nights, 9:30 at night, I'd be up in my office with my head on my desk crying, because it had been such a struggle. I had young women that some of them truly thought they did have a place, and didn't understand who they could be. And I felt like I wasn't reaching them, that I needed to do more. So I guess maybe what that honor said was, it was okay. It was worth it.
How do you feel that now people look to you as a role model?
Well, the truth is, I think everybody is a role model to somebody. And you have to be very careful of what you say and what you do, because someone is watching you and you don't even know it. It could be a neighbor. It could be somebody that you meet regularly at the grocery store, and you don't know that they are looking at you and saying, "That's the kind of behavior I want to be known for." You have no idea. So I guess I've always known that there could be somebody watching. And because I had role models that they didn't know I was watching. Charlene Hollaback, to this day, doesn't have a clue. She was our neighbor and probably 10 years older than I was. She was a role model. So you have to be careful. Watch who's watching you.
Would you like to make mention or say anything about people that have played an important role in your life?
That list is so long, my word. You think of the Sunday school teachers, the all the summers I spent at Merritt's Beach with Mrs. Duty and what I learned from her. My grandmother, Clark, was probably my single most influential person in my life. And she lived with us 6 months before I was born and really lived with my parents until I was married. And then she moved to live the majority of the time with her daughter in Wyoming for the rest of her life. But she was there with me always. And she was a very strong. She was the first woman telephone operator in the state of Nebraska. She operated the switchboard in this small town, and her husband had a freak accident and died when Mother was 2. And my grandmother had 3 daughters. One was 11 years older than Mother, and one was 13 years older than Mother. So she had those 3 daughters to finish raising on her own, and did, and worked as a telephone operator until I was born. And then that was it. So she was I wouldn't forget my dancing teacher, Jean Locken, or Miss Kitty Roberts, even though I didn't learn to play the piano, or, the ministers I've had, and Dr. Arnola Ownby, and oh my gosh, all the people, all the friends, the personal family friends that you share everything with. My colleagues, that they're still there and I'm not. So, many, many people. Dr. White.
What would be your advice to women who plan to follow in your footsteps?
Just do it your way and have the time of your life. There is not a recipe. Don't get discouraged. Find your own special place. Find your own unique spot and make it yours. It's probably what I would try to tell somebody. Find something that really, a hole that really needs to be filled, and do it. But have a good time.
What's next on the agenda for you?
Well, I continue to work with my husband's company as a consultant and facilitating seminars and workshops, and doing some consulting work. And then I'm not going to say I'm writing a book. I'm writing blips of information that might somehow come together in something that somebody might be interested in sometime.
Well, speaking of writing a book, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
That I was a good friend. That's primarily it.
Is there anything else you'd like to mention today before we end the interview? Anything I've forgotten that you'd like to add?
You know what? I think you have done a superb job of being inquisitive. So no, I just think you handled it.
Well, thank you very much for participating. We do appreciate your time today.
Oh, you're very welcome.